Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to Weekly Academics and you're listening to Faiza Inamdar. Now that I've already made podcasts on the maps of India, today I'll be sharing certain tips that would come in handy while doing the maps and in the geography exam in general. So first of all, let me just tell you why is it so important to have the maximum accuracy in the maps of India. Now, while checking the maps, the board examiners are not really lenient. The board always gives the required maps as they want the markings to be. Like as I mentioned earlier, the ones that I refer to in my podcast, they are the ones that are given by the board. So thus the board expects that the markings are very accurate, they're exact. And there are these small minute errors that we tend to make which can cost important marks. So maps being the most scoring 10 marks of the entire 80 marks paper, it's best to practice it well. And here I have certain small points to remember. So let's begin with the points to remember while marking features on the map in general. Number one, and the most important, the way you mark or draw the arrow. Now while drawing the arrow head should always be towards the feature. So for example, if you're marking the city of Hyderabad, so you'll draw a filled up spot for the point where Hyderabad is, and then you draw an arrow, and the arrow head should point towards that spot, and the name should be on the other side of the arrow. If you do it the opposite way, it might indicate that Hyderabad is probably in the Bay of Bengal then. So that's the most important thing. Your arrowhead should always be towards the feature and not towards the name. Second most important thing is while writing the name of the rivers. So while you write the name of the river, every time if it's a horizontal river, it has to be above the river. And if it's vertical rivers like we had in case of the tributaries of Ganga, in that case you use arrow. And the arrow head points towards the river. So either the name is above the river or an arrowhead is pointing towards the river and the name is on the other side of the arrow. But always remember that the name has to be above the river for any horizontal river, especially in case of the rivers in the peninsula region. Now coming to the third important point, that is the latitudes and the longitudes. So while you mark Tropic of Cancer and the Indian Standard Meridian, both these need to have their degrees along with it. So like you'll be drawing an arrowhead probably pointing towards the latitude or the longitude, and then there is the name and then there is the degree of it. So if it's the Indian Standard Meridian, you'll write Indian Standard Meridian 82.5 degrees. Okay. And the fourth most important thing that as I've already mentioned in my podcast, all the lines have to be freehand, and all the features, when you name them, you need to mention the question number. So if it is 2A, you mention 2A Ganga, done, or you mention 2B Godavari, done. But you need to mention the question number because it is very important for the examiner while checking. So if you make errors in the number of the question, you can lose marks even there. So 4 important points: the way you mark your arrow, you always write the name of the river above the river, and you always write the degrees if it's a latitude and a longitude, and you always mention the question number. Now coming down to certain specific features where we tend to make errors. I have done errors in these cases. So coming down to these are I've also talked to certain teachers and even they said that these points are certain very important points. So the number one, I've also covered these in the earlier podcasts wherever these are relevant. So number one is the Western Ghats. As I've repeatedly mentioned in the podcast of mountains and peaks, it is important to mark the ghats and the ranges accurately within the specific area. You should not be extending it. It should be exact within the space. Like the Aravalli range also, it should be exact. It should not be too long or too short. And in case of Western Ghats, most important mistake that we tend to make is we try to touch it to river Tapi, which it does not. It just starts in the line of river Godavari and ends far away from the southern tip of India. It does not even extend near to the southern tip of India. You can see those in the maps which are there in that particular podcast. Second is the marking of the Kannada coast and the Malabar coast. Now, while marking the Kannada coast, it sometimes we tend to get confused between which one is Kannada coast and which one is Malabar coast. So always remember that the order from north to south for the coast goes like Konkan coast, Kannada coast, and then Malabar coast. So Konkan coast is basically the part which comes along Maharashtra. Okay, so it extends a bit below river Krishna, like between Krishna and Tungabhadra. Then from there till a bit more than Tungabhadra comes Konkan Ghats. Comes the Kannada coast, and Kannada coast is, so from the name Kannada, it's the coast along the state of Karnataka. So just imagine that in your head and you will figure it out. And Malabar coast goes down in the region of Kerala. Okay, so it is Konkan coast, Kannada coast, and Malabar coast. Now, coming down to the third important feature, that is the marking of the Thar Desert. Now, as you can very easily access the maps given by the ICSE board on their website, or you could ask your teachers to give you certain material regarding that, or your schools might have already given you the material. But make sure that you mark all these features very accurately, because as I said earlier, the board is not really lenient in case of maps of India. So in case of Thar Desert specifically, why I'm mentioning it, because we tend to mark a huge part of Rajasthan to be Thar Desert. It's not that. First of all, it does not even come close to the Aravalli ranges if you compare the maps of physical features and mountain ranges. Thar Desert is very far from the Aravalli ranges also, and it is very close to the border. It does not really extend much. So you're not supposed to extend it into the entire state of Rajasthan. It's just to one area of it, and that is very important. That precision of marking it particularly within that particular area is very important. Coming down to the next one is the two peaks, the K2 peak and the Kanchenjunga peak. So K2 is in the Karakoram range, which if you again refer to the podcast of mountain ranges and peaks, you'll find it there also. You can find the map in that podcast also. K2 is in the Karakoram range, that means it will be the border of state of Kashmir. And Kanchenjunga is towards the eastern side near the border of Sikkim. So K2 is in the western side, that is in Kashmir, and Kanchenjunga is towards the east side, that is in Sikkim. So we tend to get confused in these two peaks, but it is important. And also while marking peaks, you just draw a triangle. You just require to draw a triangle at the point of that peak. A peak is very different from a range. A peak is just the top portion of a particular mountain. So you do not need to draw a complete brown line. If you're asked K2 or Kanchenjunga, you just mark the peak with a triangle. You do not need to draw a complete brown line. Okay. Now coming down to the last point that I wanted to mention, it is the winds. I've also mentioned this in the podcast which deals with winds in latitudes and longitudes. The southwest monsoon winds, there are two branches to the southwest monsoon winds, Arabian Sea branch and the Bay of Bengal branch. So if you're asked to mark Arabian Sea branch, you mark only the Arabian Sea branch. If asked Bay of Bengal branch, you mark only the Bay of Bengal branch. You do not need to mark both. And Arabian Sea branch, you explicitly mark it in the Arabian Sea. Bay of Bengal, explicitly mark it in the Bay of Bengal region. From southwest to northeast. You do not need to join them or draw both of them. Okay, so just a quick recap. The main features where you need to pay attention is the Western Ghats, Kannada coast, Malabar coast, Thar Desert, the two important peaks, and the winds. Okay, yes, obviously do pay attention to all the other maps. I've covered certain few minute points, minute errors that I tend to make, I used to make while I used to practice maps, and I thought that I could share those with you. So be careful with these, and the most important, again I repeat, is the marking of the arrow and the writing of the question numbers correctly. That is very important. So I hope this video helps you. I'll be coming up with the next video or with the next podcast of topography, on certain tips for topography. That will be my next podcast. Until then, if you want to listen to something soothing, something light, something relaxing, you could listen to Suno Meri Awaz by Faiza Inamdar. I always say this and will say it again, that is something that charges me, that fills me with energy to actively make these podcasts. So take care, be healthy. Until then, you're listening to Faiza Inamdar at Weekly Academics. We'll get back to you soon with tips on topography. Bye-bye.